Hello, so today we'll be presenting about the Romantic period by Lena Waizani and Noor Azzeddin. Okay, so first of all, we'll be discussing the historical background of Romanticism. This word is used to describe a movement that appreciated freedom of expression, which started in England, Europe, then the United States, and it encounters the classical rules which focus on creativity, imagination, and individuality. Belief in equality, freedom, and liberty occurred, which led to an emphasis on the individual's connection to nature. Romanticism was a reaction against industrialism. So, moving to the events in the Romantic period, many events occurred in the Romantic period, such as nationalism, evolvement of literature and art, writers finding inspiration from the French Revolution, calls for the abolition of slavery, Industrial Revolution, a movement from the countryside into the city, Beethoven's greatest works, such as Symphony 9, Noah Webster published one of the first dictionaries for the English language. Moving to another point, marriage became more equal. Before this period, women were treated as an accessory rather than as a wife. Now, women have the right and ability to engage in society and become part of it by forming friendships and relationships with other women. In addition, children became a part of their lives, and their children's education became a must. Moving to the social structure in the Romantic era, there consisted three classes: the upper, middle, and lower. The upper classes inherited wealth. The middle classes were skilled labor, such as doctors and lawyers, whereas the lower classes, they were unskilled laborers. Okay, so now we'll discuss women's wear during the 1820 to the 1825. So as seen in the picture, the waistline slowly descended and skirts became more full. To be more specific, they looked like an A shape. Also, bodices were attached to the skirts by a waistband and belts were used for decoration. Moving to the 1825, cotton was favored and printed cotton was available. The colors mostly used were yellow, orange, brown, and variety of blues. Ornamentation. As seen, ornamentation was present on the sleeves and on the hemline of the dresses. According to the late 1820s silhouette, the skirt became more full, as we can see, having pleats at the waistband, and the hem gradually began to widen. According to the 1830s silhouette, the silhouette reached its extreme, having the silhouette of two inverted triangles and addition of width at the shoulder, as we can see. The sleeves of the 1830s, there existed two types of sleeves, the gigot and demi-gigot sleeve, which were both puffed and close-fitting at the wrist. According to the necklines, there were two types of necklines, wide round or V-shaped, which were worn with the chemisettes. Discussing the silhouette of the late 1830s, as we can see in the picture, emphasis on a narrow waistline which made stays and petticoats important. For outerwear, a mantle was the most fashionable one. For the evening wear of women, necklines were lowered and off the shoulders, skirts stayed full, and the fabric used were satin, silk, and gauze. More luxurious mantelettes were worn for evening outerwear. For hair, ribbons were the ornaments. In the 1837, the silhouette began to deflate. The sleeves' fullness moved down to the arm, hemlines lengthened, sleeves became narrower, waistline returned to its natural position without a waistband, the waistline became rounded or pointed. This silhouette was known as the transitional style of the 1830s. Moving to the 1840s, as we can see, the whalebone corset was dominant, where the sleeves became narrower and fit low on the shoulder, which kept women from lifting their arms above their heads. In the late Romantic period, gowns were made in one piece. Jacket and skirts combination was popular, and the gilet corsage was a term used for the woman's jacket made in the style of a men's waistcoat. In the mid-1840s, the skirt looked like a bell shape having stiff crinolines. and multiple layers of petticoats helped in lifting the circumference of the hem. In addition, as seen, bodices had the basque weight and were too tight, necklines were either V-shaped or wide, chemisettes were worn during the day, and the pèlerine was a popular accessory.
So now we are moving on to menswear. Jane Ashelford is a fashion historian who noted that during the Romantic period, men wanted to escape the harsh realities of the Industrial Revolution and the chilly neoclassicism, and so this was reflected in the way they wore their garments. They wanted to be perceived as flamboyant and confident, and so men wore clothes with a swaggering bravado and panache. Now, after the 1825, like women, men had a nipped waistline. However, the sleeves were puffed at the shoulders. One shocking fact is that men also used to wear corsets to achieve the desired waistline. Now, overall, the desired silhouette was a wide chest with shaped legs that were achieved by using padded stockings for shoulders and calves. A fun fact that we wanted to add was that caricaturists actually mocked the way people used to wear in the Romantic era due to the extremely exaggerated silhouette of both males and females. This picture illustrates the way men used to wear as they wear. It mainly included the hat and a tailcoat, which cuts straight across the waist and has a hanging tail in the back. In addition to that, the morning coat was a variation on the dress tailcoat, featuring instead sloped fronts that curved gently toward the back. During the mid 1810s, men used to wear for an informal daytime occasion an item of clothing called the frock coat. It became more and more fashionable as time passed by, and it featured a waistline seam. It was tightly fitted, and it had a full skirt hanging straight to the knee, as you can see in the picture. Now, continuing with the 1810s, men used to wear trousers as they wear. The trousers were narrow, and until the 1840s, they became with a wider cut, and the name of the trousers was called cossacks. They are the ones in the picture. And in the 1820s, the cossacks were pleated into a waistband and tapered to a fitted ankle. Now, in the 1825, the trousers actually replaced the pantaloons. It is important to notice the difference. The pantaloons were ankle length in the 1820s with buttoned side slit and very closely fitted, similar to tights, as you can see in the picture. So they were tighter and more fitted than the trousers. Now, some similarities between the trousers and the pantaloons is that both of them featured fall front openings. They also were both attached to the shoe or the foot with straps. However, the pantaloons were seen less and less throughout the decade in the daytime, but they were still worn or were a choice for the evening wear. Now, regarding the colors, men had a less colorful palette than that of the females. The coats were usually in darker colors, such as black and brown, and if it were to be colorful, the color would be blue. The colors of the trousers, pantaloons, neckwear, and waistcoats were mostly were mostly lighter colors or white. Now, moving on to the neckwear, there were two major types. On the left side, we have the cravat, and on the right side, we have the stock. And it is important to note the difference between them. The cravat is large, it is made out of muslin or silk, and the way it is worn is that it is folded cornerwise and tied around the neck in a variety of arrangements. On the other hand, the stock is stiff and it is made out of velvet or satin, and it actually originated in military dress. In addition to that, the colors of the neckwear, as stated before, were white or even black, and they had different patterned versions. Moreover, the top hat was the standard choice for headgear, and its shape and color varied during this period. Like any other era, there were major events that happened in the Romantic era and extremely influenced the choice of garments. And in this PowerPoint, we are going to focus on the influence of social, financial, technological, and historical events. First, we have the Industrial Revolution. It was one of the major events that influenced the way people dress at the time. First of all, it made the production of clothes easier, and so it allowed the silhouette to change more often during the decade. Other than that, because of the strains and the harsh environment of the Industrial Revolution, people reacted to that in a way where they would wear these exaggerated, dramatic, confident clothes in order to escape these harsh settings. Next, we have the social influence. Now, although we spoke previously that women became more equal to men, they were still considered as the weaker sex. And if you noticed during the PowerPoint, their clothes were much more decorative and ornamented than that of the male. And that was because they were perceived as delicate, fragile, and decorative. Now, other than that, the clothing of the females was very modest. One of the reasons was the emphasis on family, home, and stricter morals. This actually impacted the way they were, of course, by raising the necklines and having even a pastel color palette for their clothing. The fabrics were heavier, and finally, this demure look helped create the ideal of a meek and submissive woman in the new Gothic style. Next, we have the influence of the history. Now, at the time, the clothing was very much inspired by different eras. There was a fascination with history. People wanted to express historical fashion, such as the medieval, Tudor, Elizabethan, and 17th century styles. Other than that, the rise of decorative trim was also seen previously in the Rococo era, and it came back into style in the Romantic period. And lastly, the dress reflected the perception of women as weak and decorative, as stated before. Next, the movement in itself, Romanticism, had a major impact on the way people dress. Now, as we previously stated, it made people want to wear layers of colors. It made people wanted to express themselves, and this was seen or reflected with the exaggeration of the silhouette. People wanted to look confident, and this created a style of dramatic display by the end of the decade. Now we're gonna sum up the textiles used for creating the garments at the time. The men wore shirts made out of linen, cotton, and osnaburg. The pants or the trousers were made out of cotton or wool. Now, occasionally, different articles of clothing included silks. On the other hand, for women, muslin was very favored. However, it wasn't the fabric of choice for the entire period. Now, one interesting fact was that dresses dated to the 1815, between the 1815 and the 1840 period, show signs of having been remade from gowns of earlier eras. And the reason why it is interesting because it aligns with the idea of sustainability we talk about today. Moving on, colors and figured materials grew more popular in this period. There was an emphasis on white because white dresses survived in the largest numbers, first of all due to the lack of dye, which helped preserve the fabric, and because white material was less likely to be reused after the century. Next, the muslin and the gauze were favored over satin and rich silk for evening wear, and the majority of day dresses were made out of heavy cotton. And lastly, many of the dresses of the best quality fabrics were destroyed when the fabric was reused a few years later. Now, as we were researching about the clothes and the fashion in the Romantic period, we noticed that many of the trends that were going on at the time really connected and related with the trends of today. And I'm not even talking about like the high fashion or couture, but even the apparel clothing that are trendy today, such as the corset or having these puffed sleeves. Other than that, a lot of fashion designers actually, like many fashion designers, recreate or reinvent the corset, such as the one we put on the left by Balmain in the fall 22 fashion show. And the one on the right is, I would say, an exact replica of the sleeves we talked about previously in the PowerPoint. The designer is Christopher Kane in 2009. Other examples include that of Simone Rocha, Spring 2023. It's one of the latest shows, and it portrays the idea of the puffed sleeves that were very trendy at the time. And the silhouette of the Romantic era is very much celebrated today in different ways. The fashion designers always try to reinvent what is already created, and that is what's happening with the fashion from the Romantic era. Finally, we suggest moving on forward for the future that the notions of romanticism are used in which exploring one's imagination and creativity is to the fullest in order to create clothes that express individuality and freedom, and to get inspired by the past in order to produce something innovative. And by saying innovative, this could be whether in technology, in the materiality, or the idea of sustainability.